After 50 years of silence, the untold rift that ended Paul Newman and Robert Redford's friendship is finally revealed. In the late 1960s, the world was trembling. The old rules were crumbling, and in their place, a restless new generation was searching for truth in art, in politics, in love. America was alive with contradiction. The echo of Woodstock's freedom mingled with the despair of Vietnam, and the golden sheen of Hollywood's old guard was beginning to tarnish. And then, amid the dust and rebellion, two stars collided. Paul Newman, already a myth wrapped in human form, had become Hollywood's golden blue flame. His eyes were like polished glass, revealing both tenderness and torment. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had fought his way through the hierarchy of fame, from nameless stage actor to cinematic royalty. He wasn't just adored, he was respected, envied, and most of all, trusted by audiences who sensed something deeply human beneath his charm. Then came Robert Redford, the young lion at the gate. He was not yet a legend, but the promise was unmistakable. Redford possessed a kind of grace that defied the usual Hollywood mold. His beauty was not loud or demanding. It was watchful, thoughtful, the beauty of someone who seemed to carry secrets. Where Newman blazed, Redford glowed. When they met on the set of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid in 1969, something extraordinary happened. The encounter wasn't just between two actors, it was between two forces of nature. What emerged was not competition, but chemistry, a bond that reshaped the very idea of male friendship on screen. It wasn't just a Western they were making. It was a mirror held up to a changing America and to the timeless question of what it means to belong, to a partner, to a dream, or to a moment in history. To understand why their meeting mattered so much, you have to picture Hollywood in 1969. The studio system, once all-powerful, was breaking apart. The clean-cut heroes of the 1950s were fading, their certainties no longer matching the chaos of the real world. Audiences no longer wanted perfect cowboys or noble soldiers. They wanted rebels, drifters, dreamers, people who failed, laughed, doubted, and lived without clear answers. Into that uncertain air rode Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It was, on paper, another Western, outlaws, train robberies, chases across deserts. But it wasn't really about the West. It was about the end of an era, about men out of time, trying to hold on to freedom while the world closed in around them. That's why Newman and Redford's chemistry felt so electric. Together, they embodied two sides of the same soul: charm and calm, mischief and mystery, courage and doubt. Paul Newman, as Butch Cassidy, played the outlaw with a grin, confident, clever, always ready with a joke. Robert Redford, as the Sundance Kid, was the quiet marksman, steady and stoic. One moved through the world like a melody, the other like a heartbeat. Their energy wasn't just acting, it was alchemy. The more they shared the screen, the more invisible the performance became. It was as if they weren't playing friends, they simply were. Audiences didn't just see two outlaws. They saw two souls leaning on each other against the inevitable. Chemistry in cinema is a strange, fragile thing. You can't design it and you can't fake it. When it happens, it feels effortless, but behind that effortlessness is something elemental. That's what made Newman and Redford's collaboration feel like lightning in a bottle. Every glance, every exchange between them seemed charged with an invisible rhythm. You could feel it even in silence, that unspoken language of trust that only true friends share. On set, the crew could sense it too. Their camaraderie was infectious, full of pranks, laughter, and mutual respect. Newman, the seasoned star, could have easily overshadowed Redford, but instead he drew him in. He saw in Redford a reflection of his own early hunger, that quiet refusal to settle for mediocrity. Redford, for his part, didn't imitate or compete. He balanced Newman perfectly, the way calm water balances firelight. He gave their scenes a subtle symmetry, one man looking outward, the other inward, both caught between rebellion and inevitability. That equilibrium made Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid more than entertainment. It became a kind of poetry about brotherhood, loss, and the fleeting nature of freedom. The audience didn't just fall in love with the film. They fell in love with them, with the idea that friendship could be both playful and profound, fearless and fragile. The late 1960s were defined by disillusionment, assassinations, protests, and the feeling that innocence had evaporated. Yet amid the noise, people were still searching for connection. Newman and Redford's on-screen partnership gave that yearning a face. It wasn't sentimental or melodramatic. It was natural, even casual, two men teasing, challenging, and trusting each other without ever needing to say what that bond meant. That subtle intimacy was revolutionary for its time. Male friendships in Hollywood films had often been stoic or transactional, soldiers in battle, partners in crime, but rarely equals in emotion. Newman and Redford changed that. They gave friendship texture. Their laughter felt genuine, their banter unscripted. When they argued, it didn't tear them apart, it deepened their connection. Through them, the Western genre, once rigid and moralistic, became human. It wasn't about good versus evil anymore. It was about loyalty versus loss. In Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, every joke carried a shadow, every smile a touch of melancholy. They were laughing not just because life was fun, but because it was fleeting. That's what made their friendship feel real. And in that authenticity, audiences saw themselves, trying to hold on to something pure while the world spun faster and colder around them. When Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid premiered, it arrived like a sigh of recognition. Here were two men on the run, charming, defiant, doomed. They lived by their own code, out of step with the new order closing in. To the young people of 1969, they looked familiar, rebels from another time, trying to stay free in a world demanding conformity. Paul Newman and Robert Redford weren't just movie stars, they became cultural symbols. Their partnership mirrored the contradictions of their era: beauty amid decay, laughter amid chaos, grace in defeat. The Western landscape, once a symbol of boundless possibility, now looked haunted. The train robberies and chases felt less like adventure and more like ritual, a last dance before the curtain fell. And yet there was joy in it. Their humor made the inevitable feel bearable. They reminded audiences that even when the story ends in darkness, the journey can still be filled with light. That balance between charm and tragedy defined the film's soul. It's what kept it alive long after the final gunshot echoed across the screen. Critics were quick to notice. They called Newman and Redford the most charismatic duo in Hollywood history, and they weren't wrong. Their chemistry didn't just boost the film, it redefined how partnerships worked in cinema. It inspired decades of buddy films, stories built around two contrasting personalities whose connection becomes the emotional core. But few, if any, ever matched the effortless grace of Newman and Redford. What they shared wasn't just chemistry, it was authenticity. It was mutual respect translated into art. Their collaboration symbolized a passing of the torch, from one era of Hollywood to another. Newman represented the golden age professionalism of the 1950s. Redford embodied the modern, introspective realism that would define the 1970s. Together, they bridged the gap. And though Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was their first collaboration, its impact would echo for generations. It showed that friendship could carry a film more powerfully than romance, that laughter could coexist with sorrow, and that rebellion could still feel pure, even when doomed. Decades later, when people think of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, they don't just remember the plot. They remember the feeling. They remember the twinkle in Newman's eye when he said something outrageous. They remember the half-smile Redford wore when words weren't needed. They remember the bicycle scene, the music, the laughter, the sunlight that felt almost nostalgic even the first time you saw it. It wasn't nostalgia for the West, it was nostalgia for connection, for the kind of friendship that makes the chaos of life bearable. That's what their partnership gave the world, a cinematic memory of loyalty. Every generation since has rediscovered that magic in their own way. Because the truth is, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid isn't really a Western. It's a story about what it means to find your other half, not in romance but in understanding. And that perhaps is why the legend of Newman and Redford endures. It's rare in Hollywood or in life for two people to meet and create something that feels timeless. But Newman and Redford did exactly that. In their laughter, audiences found hope. In their final stand, they found grace. And in their friendship, they found a truth that transcended genre or generation, that real connection doesn't fade even when the world changes around it. When the credits rolled in 1969, few could have predicted how deeply that truth would resonate. Yet more than half a century later, the echo remains. The image of two men side by side, joking, trusting, facing the impossible together has become immortal. It's not just the film that lives on. It's the feeling of it, that rare golden chemistry that happens only when two stars collide, not to destroy each other, but to illuminate everything around them. 4 years had passed since Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid lit up the screen. 4 years since the world watched two outlaws ride into myth and two actors redefine what friendship could look like. In Hollywood years, 4 can feel like forever. Stars rise and fade, trends shift, audiences move on, but some connections don't dim. They wait quietly, insistently, for the right moment to strike again. And in 1973, that moment came. The title was simple: The Sting. The premise, deceptively playful. Two con men working a long game in the glittering chaos of the 1930s. But beneath the style and swagger, something familiar pulsed, a rhythm audiences hadn't felt since Butch Cassidy. It was the rhythm of trust, of unspoken timing, of a bond that doesn't need to be explained. Paul Newman and Robert Redford were back. And the world felt ready for them, as if cinema itself had been waiting for that spark to ignite once more. The 1930s were a decade of contradictions: jazz and despair, champagne and breadlines. The world had gone from boom to bust, and the dream of easy money had turned into a cruel mirage. That's the world The Sting invited audiences into, a smoky, jazz-soaked landscape of card tricks, sharp suits, and sly smiles. But this wasn't a simple crime story. It was a dance, a performance within a performance where charm was both weapon and armor. Every wink hid a lie, every smile was a distraction. In that glittering illusion, Newman and Redford found their new stage. Newman, older now, his blue eyes a little wiser, brought an air of seasoned control. He was no longer the reckless outlaw of the frontier. He was the mastermind, the strategist, the man who'd learned how to play people as easily as cards. Redford, still quiet, still composed, played the younger partner learning the ropes. He wasn't the wide-eyed kid, he was the quick study, sharp enough to see through the con yet still enchanted by its artistry. Their dynamic had evolved, but their balance remained perfect. Together, they made deceit look like grace. It was more than acting, it was rhythms. And audiences could feel it. That same effortless current that had once turned a Western into poetry, now transforming a caper into pure cinematic jazz. Every great con needs trust, and that's what made The Sting sing. In the story, trust is a game. Characters deceive, manipulate, and mislead. Every alliance is temporary, every truth is suspect. But when Newman and Redford shared the screen, something rare cut through all the artifice: authenticity. Their connection gave the illusion weight. You believed they trusted each other, even as they fooled everyone else. That paradox, truth within deception, was the heart of The Sting. It's what made the film more than clever entertainment. It was about partnership, about faith between two people in a world built on lies. When they moved together, you could sense the invisible thread linking them, the same thread that had linked Butch and Sundance years before. It wasn't nostalgia, it was continuity. They didn't need to recreate the past. They simply carried it forward, reshaped it, and let it breathe in a new story. What happened next was beyond even Hollywood's expectations. The Sting didn't just succeed, it exploded. $350 million at the box office, 11 Academy Award nominations, 7 wins including the crown jewel, Best Picture. But numbers only tell part of the story. The real phenomenon was emotional. Audiences left theaters glowing, not because they'd been fooled by a clever twist, but because they'd been charmed, delighted, restored. In a decade still raw from Vietnam, Watergate, and social upheaval, The Sting felt like an escape. It was smart but light, stylish but sincere. It reminded people that wit could still win the day, and that partnership, honest or otherwise, still mattered. Newman and Redford weren't just acting. They were embodying a kind of optimism that felt rare. Two men, different in energy but equal in presence, moving through danger with humor and loyalty intact. It was the same chemistry that had made them legends before, matured, refined, and now wrapped in silk instead of dust. Some legacies are built over decades, through countless roles and collaborations. Others happen in flashes, brief, perfect pairings that capture lightning not once but twice. For Newman and Redford, it took only 2. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The Sting. 2 films, 2 triumphs. That was all it took to carve their names into cinematic eternity. They didn't need a franchise or sequels or a lifetime of co-starring credits. Their legend was complete not because of quantity, but because of the quality of their connection. Each film represented a distinct chapter of their shared mythology. In Butch Cassidy, they were rebels, laughing at the world as it closed in. In The Sting, they were artists, conning the world with elegance and precision. One celebrated freedom, the other celebrated mastery. Together, they mapped the full arc of charisma, from wild youth to composed genius. And through it all, their friendship, real or imagined, felt like the pulse beneath the story. After The Sting, the calls began almost immediately. Fans begged for a reunion, studios dreamed of it. Scripts were written, rumors floated, and journalists speculated endlessly. What would Newman and Redford do next? It felt inevitable. After all, how could something so golden end after just 2 films? But it never came. There was no third act, no grand finale. The curtain simply fell softly and without ceremony. For some, that absence felt like loss. For others, it made the legend even more powerful. Because sometimes perfection lies in what's unfinished, in the restraint of knowing when to stop. 2 films were enough. They told the story they needed to tell in 2 very different ways. And then, like any great con, they vanished, leaving only the echo of what once was. There's a kind of poetry in absence. In art, as in life, some connections burn brighter because they end before fading. The Newman-Redford partnership became one of those rare myths, brief, dazzling, and untouched by decline. The fact that they never made a third film together gave their collaboration a sense of completeness, as though destiny had given them two perfect notes, and they'd known better than to play a third. That decision, whether deliberate or accidental, turned their partnership into something eternal. Audiences could imagine what might have been, but nothing could ever distort what already was. The two films stood as pillars, one dusty, one polished, holding up a bridge of nostalgia that time has yet to erode. Across both films, one theme endured: friendship. Not sentimental, not romantic, but genuine companionship. In Butch Cassidy, friendship was survival. It was laughter against the dark, loyalty against the odds. In The Sting, friendship was artistry, two minds working in tandem, pulling off something bigger than themselves. In both worlds, the fading West and the roaring 30s, friendship was the constant. It was the heartbeat beneath the adventure. That's what audiences responded to most deeply. Not just the clever dialogue or clever twists, but the warmth between two men who trusted each other implicitly, no matter how chaotic the world around them became. They weren't superheroes or saints. They were human, and that humanity made them unforgettable. In an industry built on repetition, Newman and Redford were the exception. They never tried to replicate their success for the sake of it. They never turned their partnership into a brand, and in doing so, they protected it, preserved its magic. Their absence became part of their allure. For years, fans wondered why it ended there, but perhaps the better question was, how did it ever happen twice? How did two stars, each powerful enough to carry any film alone, manage to create a harmony so seamless that neither eclipsed the other? That was their secret, not the con, not the script, but the balance. Each understood the other's rhythm, each gave space for the other's light, and in a business often ruled by ego, that generosity was revolutionary. When you look back at those two films now, decades later, they still feel fresh, not because of nostalgia, but because of truth. The costumes, the sets, the eras, all period details, but the energy between Newman and Redford, timeless. It's the kind of magic that can't be written into a script or captured by direction alone. It happens when trust meets talent, when playfulness meets precision. Their legacy isn't measured in awards or box office numbers, though both were remarkable. It's measured in the way their partnership made people feel. Watching them together, you felt lighter. You believed in camaraderie again. You remembered what it meant to share laughter in a dangerous world. And maybe that's why two films were enough, because they said everything they needed to say about human connection. Imagine it, two men in perfect sync, one glance enough to tell 1,000 stories. Now imagine that image frozen in time, untarnished by repetition, unspoiled by imitation. That's the gift Newman and Redford left behind. By never returning for a third film, they let the curtain hang midair, suspended between endings and beginnings. After The Sting, decades passed. Redford and Newman stayed friends, golfing, writing letters, supporting each other's causes. But when it came to movies, nothing. Still, the dream of a reunion never truly died. Redford developed A Walk in the Woods, a story about two old friends hiking the Appalachian Trail, a role written with Newman in mind. But by then, Newman's health was fading. The project slipped away. Years later, it was made with Nick Nolte instead. It was a quiet heartbreak for Redford, a missed chance to share one last frame with his oldest friend. Then came another opportunity, one that could have been legendary. Hollywood's new icons, George Clooney and Brad Pitt, were often called the Newman and Redford of their generation. So when screenwriter Ted Griffin began working on Ocean's 12, he had a daring idea. Why not bring in the originals, Paul Newman and Robert Redford, to play Danny Ocean and Rusty Ryan's fathers? It was perfect, the symbolism, the nostalgia, the passing of the torch. Two generations of charm on the same screen. But before any offers could even be made, the dream was dead. Griffin later revealed on the Script Apart podcast. Someone involved in the movie had a very bad relationship with one of those two men and said, "Nah, it's not going to work. They won't work together." Just like that, it was over. No names, no details, only silence. Someone somewhere had held a grudge that ended Hollywood's most beloved friendship from ever lighting up the screen again. Was it pride, was it politics, or just time slipping away? No one knows for sure, but the tension was real enough to stop the impossible from happening. Still, the bond between Redford and Newman endured quietly. When Newman passed away in 2008, Redford chose not to appear publicly. Instead, he grieved in private. Later, he spoke softly about his friend. All those memories, all that laughter, that's what I hold on to. I owe so much of who I am to him. In the end, they only made 2 films together, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Sting. Just 2. But sometimes, 2 stories are all it takes to change the face of cinema. They were outlaws, con men, brothers on screen and off. And even though their final ride never came, their legacy remains untouchable. The curtain never rose on their third act, but the legend of Paul Newman and Robert Redford will never fade.